Thank you, everyone, for listening to our show. Dr. Grant Garcia is with us today, and this was an unplanned show. We were enjoying our weekly football, watching Thursday night football, and on the field, we saw something that was very concerning. Dr. Garcia then proceeded to text me and said, this is something that we need to talk about. So before we get into too much of the details about last night, I just want your initial reaction of what you saw on the field and, you know, what triggered in your head to say, hey, we need to talk about this.
So, I mean, seeing the initial injury for Tua and falling on the ground, you know, and then the sort of convulsing sort of concern for the potential seizure that happened is really concerning. And then obviously I mentioned this before, but I have a text chain with a bunch of my friends from medical school. And one of the people on the text chain is actually the one of the neurologists for the Denver Broncos. So it was kind of interesting to hear that perspective through the text message chain. Unfortunately, we couldn't get him on the show today. I tried, but maybe in the future once NFL gives clearance. So, but I think the response from many of us was, you know, how could this happen? This is really frustrating. And then looking it up online and seeing the same responses throughout sort of the Twitter community, et cetera. It is something we should talk about because I think that, you know, I take care of high school. I see college and higher level football players, but majority of the time on the field for the high school team, you know, we take concussions really seriously. And I know that the NFL's had lots of issues with concussions in the past, are continuing to deal with this on a daily basis. But this was an example of something that is just really something we need to talk about more frequently. We've talked about concussions on the show before, but the second impact syndrome is a big deal. So it needs to be brought up.
Okay, great. So let's backtrack before we get to last night. Last night was Thursday night football. So we're talking about quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. He suffered an injury on Sunday. And just to give some images for anyone that hasn't seen it there, he was hit by a lineman. He fell back, banged his head, kind of laid there for a second, got up, shook his head, took a couple steps, stumbled to his knees, got up. They got him off the field. He went back into the training room. And then in the second half, after being evaluated, they said that he had sustained a back injury and an ankle injury, and that's why he stumbled, was cleared to play in the second half. Let's start there with last week. When you say gross motor instability, what does that mean?
Well, you know, it can mean a bunch of different things, but if someone has gross motor instability, it means that there's something wrong with either their reflexes in their body. You know, you've always seen a hammer, those things, or, you know, their movements of their eyes, movements of their head, movements of their hands. Something's off. It's not normal. And, you know, again, players get hurt. Players do random limps and things like that after these games. They're sore. But there's things that you can identify, especially if you're a practitioner that checks these things out a lot. And you should be able to identify those areas. Obviously, the one caveat is players are always wary getting evaluated for concussions because they know if they get an evaluation that's positive, they're out. And highly competitive players, as we know, will try whatever it takes to knock it off the field. I mean, my high schoolers will hide it. So it's something you got to be aware of. You got to be on high alert, I would say.
Yeah, and I think what's concerning about this, it's such an interesting definition because that's what the NFL, you know, talks about, right? They talk about a lot of different things. They have their steps, but one of them is the gross motor instability. And Tua clearly showcased that. And the fact that after their evaluation, they said, no, he's been cleared for concussion and came back on the field. But as viewers, as watching the replays, seeing him shake his head, fall into a knee, you know, coming off the field wobbly, right? And we've seen this before with players. For him to be back in that second half, whether he cleared protocol, and there've been plenty of other players saying, hey, we know how to beat the protocol. You know, we've done this for so long. We already kind of know what's going on. Why didn't this is a weird way to ask this question. What is the responsibility of everyone involved that after you pass all of these protocols that you just go with the eye test and say, I saw him not act correctly. I can't put him back in the game. Tough question.
It's a tough question. Well, it's a tough question being a team physician. You know, you have so much on you. You know, we've already seen, you know, an example, saw a team physician getting sued for the Chargers who gave the pneumothorax after an injection of the ribs. You've seen hundreds of these things that have gone out to these positions doing things. So your question is, do you say too much? Do you say too little? What's the right thing to do? And then you have the trainers. You don't get to see behind the scenes where you have this is a team that last year was just so. This year they're 2-0 at the time. They were going to be 3-0 potentially. Beating the Bills. Huge change, and they're on this pace to sort of win this next game.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. I mean, people don't realize there's so much money involved. There's so much other things involved. You have, it's as we've seen from movies about the concussions with the NFL, this is a massive, massive conglomerate. And you're just a small cog in the wheel, even though you're a team position trying to keep everybody safe. Your job, your reputation's in jeopardy for everything you do. And it's a high stress, high medical legal risk situation, which a lot of physicians don't even put themselves into, even if they have the opportunity, because it's just not worth the risk of taking care of this. So you have to put that in perspective on making a decision. It's easy for me to say on the high school level, when I take care of kids, if any kid's wobbly, I kick them out of the game. They're done.
Yeah.
I have no problems doing that. But I don't have 3 coaches, agents, the entire NFL, an entire season, multiple millions of dollars on the line, and having to add that to the level of stress, or saying, thanks for, you pulled out all of our players every game for concussions. We're actually not going to have you back next year. Thank you.
I think that's a fascinating point. I'm just going to read this real quick, and I know I'm kind of stuck on this a little bit, but this is what really stands out for me is, under the current protocol, a player who demonstrates gross motor instability must be evaluated for a concussion. He can, however, return to play if the team physician and the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant concluded that the gross motor instability did not have a neurological cause. The reason I'm reading that, because it sounds like there's gray area, and that's really what stands out for me, is saying, wait a minute, you're exhibiting these signs, but if the physician and this, unaffiliated consultant, which I don't know what it means, because if you're getting hired by these people every week, I feel like you're affiliated. Is that concerning right there? Is that one of the problems right there, to put it, to oversimplify it?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have someone on a payroll, these guys, these neurologists, anybody on there, they're all being paid by the NFL, either through the NFL or directly because they work for the NFL, work on the NFL field. Their livelihood is because they're in that conglomerate, in that franchise. And so, there is always those biases. That being said, I obviously am a physician. I'm in a similar position to them.
Yep.
I would always do my best to make sure that what's best for the players. I know a lot of team physicians, and they're really good physicians, really good surgeons. And I know neurologists. I have my good friend who works for the Broncos. Even he's saying, I would have done something differently, but he wasn't in that situation, right? He didn't have that clearance. We don't know what happened. Did Tua somehow pass everything appropriately, which we assume he did.
Yep.
And then he got back out there and then had a secondary impact syndrome, which is incredibly dangerous. But it's also hindsight's 2020. How many players have this happen to them that we never see anything happen? So we're just seeing, and also it just happened to be the worst case scenario. The star of the team, a 3-0 football team. He's had a lot of press on him recently about being, whether he's good enough to play in the NFL or be the starting quarterback.
Injury concerns.
A lot of things from him. Injury concerns. It was like literally the worst case scenario.
Contract year, right? This is a contract year for him after this year. So that you go back to what you originally mentioned, the millions and millions of dollars, the 52 other guys in the locker room that are hoping that you're going to be out there so they can win, so they can make more money. There's this whole big pie, and there's so many different pieces, especially when it comes to that position. I'm going to fast forward to last night, which was Thursday Night Football. He's playing the Cincinnati Bengals. All eyes, the only game on the schedule for Thursday. All eyes on this game. And he goes out there and plays against the Cincinnati Bengals. And what happens next, I believe it was in the second quarter, it was pretty much horrifying. Can you please describe that play and the reaction, just so we can have context for this conversation?
If I remember correctly, he hit the ground, and then you see some movement of his arms, and clearly something's not right. And basically what happens is if he's had a concussion and you're not fully recovered, the secondary impact syndrome, which again, there's data, is like a 50% mortality, which is really scary.
Yeah.
And basically has a seizure as a result of the secondary concussion, which is not something that we ever And that's the number one reason I pull players out in the first place, is to never have this happen. There are like 5 things in orthopedics that we don't ever want to see. And for sports medicine, there's about top 3, and this is about up there, especially with stuff we deal with on a day-to-day basis. If you're a sports medicine physician, a neurological neck injury or paralysis or a secondary impact syndrome are right up there for the 2 number one things that will keep me up at night.
It was extremely scary. He draws back to pass. He has a lot of time to make a decision. And that was something that I questioned. I'm talking with my wife, right? She's a trooper. She sits there and she watches games with me here and there. God bless our wives that deal with us. And I'm saying to myself, after he got hit, right? So he has the ball, he gets sacked, he kind of gets whipped around, bangs his head, and then we have this clear concussion. His hands are up in the air, which is called this fencing position. I'm gonna ask you the definition of fencing that for a second. But for me, what stood out was, normally in that situation, you're going to get rid of that ball. It wasn't like a bang bang play, and then you start to think about like, well, was there maybe there's something that slowed down a little bit, right, from what happened 4 days ago? Because it was unusual for me to see him hold that ball for so long, knowing that this 300-plus man that's coming down to do you no good is chasing after you, and you're not making a decision to get rid of it, so you're protected once you get rid of the ball. So that was one of the things, right? So maybe reaction time had a part of it. Maybe he was just trying to be greedy and get more, something down the field. But let's go back to fencing, that stiffness. One of my first love of sports is boxing. I watch MMA. I've seen it when people have been just incredibly destructive knockouts, that you see this, and then now you see this on the field on this Thursday night football game. What is fencing?
Well, basically fencing is, we talk about, a lot of the definitions come from newborn babies that can have head trauma or traumatic brain injuries, et cetera. But from like a standard sports side of things, basically, your arms flex up from this traumatic injury, and basically you go certain these unnatural positions. It's like this response you have from having this traumatic brain injury. And obviously a concussion, you don't usually get that, but from the secondary one, it can be more aggressive, like with small children that are just born and have a problem. And you get this like really sort of archaic response for your reflexes. And that's essentially what you're getting.
I know you touched upon the secondary second impact syndrome. What is, obviously the health is the big concern here, but really what stands out when you have a player like that? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what's the next step? You're the team doctor. You had a player that has gone through this. What are you looking for to make sure that before you put him back on the field, in danger again? What is something that's standing out for you that you're saying, I can't do this unless I see this?
I mean, unfortunately, they're no longer in concussion protocol. I mean, this is a nationally televised thing. You have multiple articles coming out about this now. I mean, this is no longer a concussion protocol. This is if he goes out there in a week, there are going to be lawsuits everywhere. I mean, I'd be shocked if the Miami Dolphins are under a crazy amount of scrutiny now. With this happening. Yeah. And there is going to be some significant issues. I mean, I texted you this morning that NFL Players Association is investigating what's going on. And again, it's always, the problem you have is it's always the Players Association versus the owners, right? The owners owners are still, I mean, again, we can all talk about, I don't want to get into politics of the NFL, but the owners want all the players on the field, and they want to win, and they want to make money. And the NFL players want their players to get paid. They want their players to be on the field, but their players also, they care first and foremost that their players aren't permanently damaged for the rest of their lives, right? Because they're in charge of stuff long-term too. They're in charge of the health benefits for these players. These running backs that can't walk more than 20 steps when they're 50, they care about that stuff too, because they're representing the players union, right? And so you have these two major bodies against each other. And really, they don't really like each other that much if you read all the articles. But now they're having to investigate. So this is a big deal. Well, this is not going to be going away for a while.
Well, one of the problems was that the PA Association was going to do an investigation about Sunday's game, but the investigation was going to happen today after he had already played on Thursday. So that's a whole other problem. let's move on because I can do this and we could get into the weeds about all this stuff with whether it's like you said, ownership, organization. The Miami Dolphins already have some bad reps and some rumors and things like that. So we're not even going to go down there. That'll be a whole other fun show if we did that and get some other players on. But let's talk about what suggestions, right? And it's not going to be right. It's not going to be perfect, but obviously something is wrong with this protocol. I mean, the fact that my wife sees games here and there and she's like, there's something wrong. This is not working out. What are some of your suggestions or thoughts on how you can make this protocol better? Because the reality is this is a very violent and physical sport, and this will continue to happen. So how can you have a balance between, this type of injury and keeping the player safe as best as possible, which sounds like almost an oxymoron. But what do you think that you can do or suggest going forward?
I think the number one thing is just to try to find the ways to reduce bias as much as possible. You give an independent council of neurologists, which they kind of have, but maybe find a way to make this even less biased, because it just seems a little bit unusual that there can be a gray zone, and just eliminate the gray zone. Those gray zone calls are out, right? If you have a gray zone call, the player's out. That is going to be incredibly hard to do because basically someone's making a call that this player might be healthy enough to play, but you're going to lose the football game as a result, which in the NFL is a big deal.
Yes.
Right. And for Tua, it's a big deal too, because the less he plays, the lower his stats are, the less negotiation power he has. Right now, and we all want to talk about how we feel so sad for his mental health, which I do, but his long-term stuff too. I mean, they're going to use this against him. The Dolphins can easily use this against him for his next contract.
Yeah.
Which is even more
any other
up.
Team also. And that's a problem also.
They will use it against them.
Yeah.
They 100% will use it against them. So basically, this is a lose-lose for him. The Dolphins will be punished too, probably, and they're going to investigations and everything else. But this will be a lose-lose for the player who got hurt, which is just insanity.
And for his family.
But precisely. So the way to get rid of this, the way to reduce this problem is to reduce that independent council even more, make it even more independent. Maybe they're paid by the NFL Players Association, so they're biased to remove the player, right? So that may be. Honestly, there's nothing wrong. This sounds so crazy, but it's just like in anything we do in medicine. And I see where it speaks. If I have any inkling there's something wrong, like if one of my patients has a blood clot, I'm worried about having some issue with their lungs. Like the best thing to do is just say no. You're not allowed to do this. Like you're out. I had a kid last week on one of my football games. I thought he broke his neck. He had cervical pain. Oh my God. Numbness in his fingers. It turned out to be negative. We haven't had that in a long time. And it turns out his dad's an orthopedic surgeon too. So this is a whole nother animal.
Yeah.
And I said, no matter what, you're not playing anymore and you're going to the hospital to get a CT scan.
Yeah.
But you know what? Ended up being negative. I don't feel silly. I would much rather be wrong and pull that person out than to be right and have it still be a problem. But it's just not worth it ever. And so that's what you need. You need someone that mentality. And it's so easy for me to say this because I'm not on the field doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
But you need to have that. It's got to be no and then yes, not let's just see which it is. Does that make sense? It's got to be automatically you're out and maybe you get back in.
Well, I think one of the things also they should consider doing is mandatory, right? If you exhibit any signs, you're out 10 days, 7 days, 14 days, whatever the case may be. I think the problem is that we don't have a definite, letter of the law. If you have any symptoms, no matter how small or great, you have to be out X amount of times before you get reevaluated. No questions asked. Even if you feel fantastic and you're doing cartwheels on the third quarter, you're out X amount of time, because what's going to happen is you're going to have these problems and these players are going to play, especially if this happens going into the playoffs, right? Troy Aikman, famously, the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, said he suffered a concussion in the NFC Championship game, played in the Super Bowl 2 weeks later against the Bills, and he says he does not remember one play in the biggest game, the most important game of a player. He does not remember the game at all.
Yeah,
that's frightening. So anyway, I know you got to go. I'm so glad that you took a few minutes to talk about this. And I mean, we could go on and on. Dr. Garcia, I really appreciate your time. Do you have any final thoughts as we had our ways?
I think I want people to hear this to say, listen, we're not putting this out to say the Miami Dolphins are bad people or the NFL are bad people. We don't have we have all what we see. We don't see behind the closed doors. That being said, the point of this podcast today was to say, listen, what happened last night is very scary. Yeah. And if your son or daughter is playing football, or, your kids are playing football, and we tell you you're out, this is why we did it. So you need to know that, like, this is why we have these protocols. So this doesn't happen to your son or daughter, and this doesn't happen to you as a parent watching this happen. So that's why we're doing this today. It is not just pointing fingers. It's just that people remember this way more than they'll remember a random high school kid getting something bad.
Yeah, that is a perfect way, because that's the reality, is that's our audience, right? It's moms, dads, and the regular Joes. And whether it's football, we've talked about, concussions in soccer, that's high, and all these other sports, so not just football. If you're not going to have someone protect your son and daughter, make sure as a parent that you do that and say, no, you're not going back, you're not playing. We're going to keep you out for a while because it's going to be better for you. So anyway, listen, Dr. Garcia, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your weekend. And I really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, and hopefully everybody enjoys the podcast, and look forward to our next one. We'll talk about some more futuristic things coming down the line.
That sounds exciting. I'll talk to you. Thank you very much. That is Dr. Grant Garcia. Take care, everyone.